The following is a conversation with Dr Megan Eldred, Senior Policy Advisor and Dementia Mission Lead at the Office of Life Sciences. Megan walked us through her journey from PhD and potential academia to transition into the UK civil service, supporting the public, society, deliver on scientific innovation. She told us about her journey to becoming the Senior Policy Advisor and Dementia Mission Lead and everything that entails. More generally, the mission aims to develop novel precision medicine tools that help boost the number and speed of clinical trials in dementia and neurodegeneration. This is much needed and a highly impactful endeavour. We all know somebody who is suffering from or who has suffered from dementia. It is devastating and still has massive unmet clinical needs and is a huge cost and burden to society. That is a burden that is getting bigger because of an ageing population. Megan talked about some interesting scientific and commercial developments in this field, including the approval of 2 drugs to slow the progression of dementia. We spoke about cures for Alzheimer's disease and how close and how far away we are. We also spoke about psychedelics, exercise, the mind-body connection, and burnout. As always, I would encourage you, if you're enjoying this podcast, to like and subscribe. The best thing you can possibly do to support Inside Matters is to hover your finger over the 5-star reviews and to kindly give us 5 stars. This helps bump us up the algorithm so more people hear and listen to the podcast and ultimately benefit from the no-cost scientific information that we're delivering to you, the listener. Thank you to everyone who supported the podcast to date. This is Inside Matters. My name is Dr. James McElroy. I hope you enjoy it.
So going back to, my grandma had Alzheimer's and my granddad had Parkinson's. There's a lot of kind of neurodegenerative stuff in the family. And hers came on, I guess, relatively quickly, and she progressed quite quickly over time. Meanwhile, her sister, my great aunt, was just kind of in the most unbelievable condition. She just looked so good. And it's kind of weird that, isn't it? First degree relatives. One goes to 100 and the other dies early, or not really, really early. With
what sort of age?
I think she was 80. I think 80s. Not close to 90. I think it was. I think it was over 10 years ago that she passed away now. And gosh, Alzheimer's and dementia is just, it sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's really, really, really bad, and it just kind of got worse and worse. And my dad's sister was kind of doing a lot because she lived the closest. And I was a younger man at the time. I think I'm still young.
Still young.
Younger man. I turned 30 recently.
I was going to say, I think we're similar age. So,
I'm feeling old. There is a couple of grey hairs coming in. Even with all this microbiome stuff that I'm doing, there's a couple of grey hairs coming in and so on. But I remember towards the end, vividly remember, she asked the same questions over and over and over. And I think my granddad was kind of in denial. He was, oh, you know that, don't you? And he was very patient and supportive. But,
I hear it's a short-term memory that goes in some of these diseases, and that's what makes it hard, the kind of day-to-day living.
Right.
But they often retain a lot of their older memories.
Right.
There's a nice kind of snippet on YouTube about an institution somewhere in one of the Scandinavian countries. I can't remember now.
I think it's Holland.
Yeah, it's very world leading. It's basically a care home designed for people with dementia. So the carers are all really specialist, and they have everything set up to cater for them, to make it as least stressful as possible.
Right.
And yeah, as they're interviewing one of the carers, they say, don't correct them, because as far as they're aware, that is their reality, and all you'll do by correcting them is stressing them out.
Confuse them.
Yeah. And so if they want to talk about an old memory, just run with it, just kind of live in that memory with them.
Do they also play music that they were familiar with before?
Apparently they have a really good memory of music, yeah.
They can dance, they get up and start moving.
Yeah.
And
So
one of the other ones I saw was they brought kids in to the care home.
Oh, right.
And that gave them a lot of energy.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's quite nice, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. There's a Japanese robotic seal that has been designed to have the same benefit. I saw it at a conference recently. I got to interact with it. It's actually very realistic, but it's the benefit it's trying to derive.
You say realistic?
So what it does is it's meant to act like a pet. So kids and pets apparently provide a lot of benefit to patients with cognitive impairment, with all these sorts of issues, because they just provide a lot of joy, and they can connect with it in a way that doesn't require memory or difficult social cues. So yeah, a Japanese company has developed a seal, which is meant to emulate having a pet, but without the responsibilities of caring for a pet.
Nice.
And it provides quite realistic facial expressions, let's put it that way.
Did you pet the seal?
I did. I held it.
How did that feel?
And it looked at me in this loving way, and I slightly fell in love with it.
No
a little
way!
bit. Yeah.
Even though you knew it was a robot?
It actually elicits an emotional response, yeah, for sure.
What?
Yeah. I mean, I love animals, especially dogs, so like I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. But no, this thing was fairly realistic, and I'm pretty sure it's got regulatory approval and all sorts. It's one of the first kind of medical devices to be able to do this that's getting approval.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it looked at you with its robotic eyes, and it sort of, I can't even do it.
I think it even kind of meowed at me as I stroked it to
really?
Give me some feedback that it was enjoying the interactions.
But honestly, could you see dogs being replaced by robotic? Maybe actually.
Well, for patients who can't take care of a dog, then it's certainly an interim solution.
Have you got a dog?
I don't at the moment, but I would like one.
Are you aware of the microbiome research that suggests that if you have a dog, you have higher microbiome diversity and you're less likely to be depressed?
Yeah, I mean, the first I heard from one of your podcasts, it doesn't surprise me because I suppose...
Oh, you listened to that one? Have you listened to loads?
No, I listened to a couple.
That's awesome.
Just to get a sense of, what you talk about. But it doesn't surprise me because, just diverse interaction with germs is going to create the best immune system. And the depression aspect, I think, relates to what I was talking to before, where
For sure.
dogs give unconditional love and affection and attention without any kind of expectation. I used to have a dog growing up, so I know what it's like. And yeah, for sure.
It makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's hard
they lift
to tell.
your mood no matter what.
100%. But is it the virtue of, is it the dog sort of just being really loving and energetic and being just so happy to see you every single time it sees you? Or is it the fact that it's making your microbiome more diverse?
Oh, the link to depression?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about the links between the microbiome and depression, but there's the aspect that they're pleased to see you and you probably feel wanted and needed, and everybody wants that. And then there's the element around dogs giving people a sense of purpose and routine. You have to take them out for a walk. You have to feed them, take care of them.
Yep.
Who knows? You tell me what's the link between the microbiome and depression.
Well,
is this the gut-brain axis?
it's the gut-brain axis, and we'll talk a lot about the gut-brain axis today as we learn more about your journey and what you're doing now with the Dementia mission. But I think, so there's a couple different facets. So what researchers have done, as they've done many disease areas, is profiled the composition of the microbiome in patients with depression and profiled the composition of the microbiome in a quote-unquote control, quote-unquote healthy cohort. And there's obviously debate around what constitutes a healthy cohort and what constitutes control in this context. But essentially there's distinct differences, and there's ecological level differences, so typically less diversity, and then there's specific strains which seem to be associated with depressed type symptoms and non-depressed phenotypes. So there's that. Then there's the animal model work, where they have essentially moved microorganisms from mouse that are depressed into mice that don't have depression, and sort of transferred that depressed phenotype. Same thing with the anxious phenotype.
Yeah.
Same thing with other neurodegenerative diseases. So there's a story building there.
Okay, yeah.
And you can breed mice in germ-free environments as well. So you're essentially kind of controlling for what differences there might be to the microbiome before they get the microbiome from the source, which is in this instance, a mouse with depression. They've also done human to mouse transfers as well. I'm less familiar with that, and I have some skepticism about that insofar as, there's distinct differences between the human microbiome and animal microbiomes. And in fact, at our company, we've argued that the animal models are just not relevant. So, if that's our position and we hold that position, it's difficult to then say, well, all this animal model stuff looks really convincing.
Just from what you've explained, I think when you first talked about ecological studies, I was less convinced. But when you talked about the transplant or transfer studies, more convincing, because it more directly shows cause and effect rather than correlative. Because I think from my basic understanding, if we're talking about depression, there's probably a lot of co-factors rather than cause and effect relationships. People who are depressed are less likely to take care of themselves in many ways. So yeah, how do you kind of work through all that and work out what's the cause and effect?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And the proponents of, the supporters of those animal model transfer studies say pretty much exactly what you've just said. So you've got it so quickly, which I'm not surprised about because you're very smart. And so that's a strength, and you can literally do these cause and effect studies. And they've done similar things in cancer as well. So, and what I have seen done really well, actually, and I think this is probably even better than what we've just discussed, is in cancer studies, they've done a human interventional trial with FMT. Then they've taken all the samples from the humans and they've transferred them into mouse models. So germ-free mouse models.
Yeah.
And they've shown the same things.
Okay. Yeah.
I thought that was really nice. That was like a thing as strong as it gets.
Yeah.
And then how do you make it stronger? Well, you do bigger and bigger studies to reduce the probability of it all occurring by chance. And that was one of the limitations of that cancer study I was talking about, just published recently in Nature Review Medicine. But I think, when you think about depression, and we're going to talk about Alzheimer's because that's now your wheelhouse and you're sort of, you're leading something very important there. It does seem a little bit far-fetched and a bit of a stretch to think, well, if I just change my microbiome through an FMT, then that's going to cure depression long-term. However, if you paired the FMT with a change to diet and a change to exercise, they all might be linked, and then you might, improve the symptomatology. So there's a lot still to do.
Yeah.
And before I came here today, I did have a look at FMT studies in gut-brain axis, neurodegenerative disease, that kind of thing. And there was one in Alzheimer's disease in 2020, but it was terminated because of COVID.
Oh.
And there have been a few in depression, and I don't know where they're going.
So you asked if I research anything separately.
Yes.
So nothing like in a professional capacity, but I have gotten a lot more interested in the relationship between the body and the mind, like in terms of mental health.
Oh, I love this, yeah.
So I guess that's why I'm commenting on these sorts of things. So.
Are you talking about the spiritual side of the mind?
More. So I take a more scientific view of it, in terms of everything in the mind is because of pathways of neurons that have developed either through early development, but also through learned experiences, etc. Done a lot of kind of reading and listening to podcasts and even TikTok videos about childhood trauma and how that affects you in adult life and all that sort of thing. So, but I think that's all to do with neuronal circuits that have developed and become strengthened because of certain experiences. And then as you're an adult and maybe you live in a different environment, those circuits are so strong that they still impact you now. But it's possible to sort of unlearn them.
Interesting.
There's things around like habit forming. I've got a book which I haven't read yet. It's on my bookshelf. I can't remember the title of it.
It's all right.
Something about habits.
Is it Atomic Habits by James Clear?
Possibly.
That's a classic one. It's really good, yeah. He's like, how many times have you not brushed your teeth in the last year?
Yeah.
That's because you've got a habit.
Yeah.
And it's just like so formed and entrenched and ingrained in your day-to-day you can't know.
Yeah. So
imagine if you had meditation as that strong a habit, how you'd feel. So what is your thoughts then on the mind-body connection then? Because this is a huge, deep, challenging topic, isn't it? And I guess it could verge into what's consciousness and what am I and are we in a simulation? But more generally, like, healthy body, healthy mind, is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Or
So I take a scientific, physiological view on it. So it depends what you describe as the spirit. I'm not religious. I don't believe in something that kind of influences us outside. I don't believe in astrology, for instance. But I think the mind the brain as a biological organ is actually so complicated that probably a lot of things could be explained the more we understand how the brain actually works. There are certain things that can't be explained at the moment, but that's just because, from my research field, I understand that there's so much we don't know yet about the basic biological processes by which the brain develops. And it doesn't just develop during childhood, it continues to develop through adulthood. It's plastic. The pathways continue developing and reinforcing, and sometimes we can sort of there are arguments about you can't truly unlearn something, but you can reduce the strength by which you kind of relive it. When we're talking about habits, apparently you can't completely unlearn a habit, but you can overtake it with another habit if it's stronger than the previous one. So if you're addicted to something like smoking or alcohol or drugs, well, actually, addiction to more hardcore things is related to other experiences. But if you want to overcome that,
can I just unpack that a little bit? So you're thinking that addiction is a manifestation of early life trauma?
So I've read a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. He does a lot of kind of social media stuff as well. So if people are interested in it, he's great at speaking. This book talks about, so he ran clinics in downtown Vancouver where there is a very high instance of addiction, hardcore drug addiction.
Okay.
And essentially every one of his patients that he sees in these clinics have had childhood traumas. And he hypothesizes that all of these addictions have come out of trying to soothe the pain that they have from those childhood traumas. They didn't just become addicted for no reason. It wasn't just somebody at a party was offered a drug one day and suddenly they're addicted. It was they've discovered these drugs through whatever route. The drugs have given them a high. And many drugs are targeted at the pathways around
dopamine.
Yeah, dopamine, and those kind of reward pathways that get reinforced are then reinforced by the drug. And typically people with addiction are trying to soothe something. It's acting as a crutch, and so they take the drug more, and then they get addicted because the reward pathway reinforces it, and then it's very hard to undo. And my theory is that people that you can't just wean them off the drug in a physical way. They need the therapy to kind of do the work around the trauma.
Right.
Otherwise, they'll just find something else.
They'll get addicted to something else.
Yeah.
So does that mean that all these medical cures for addiction, so to speak, using other drugs that modulate the brain, none of them are as effective or likely to be as effective as delving into the root cause, which is the trauma?
I think you need both. I think because so many people won't be willing to delve into the trauma unless they're kind of stabilized to a particular level.
Because it's too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like people who are on antidepressant medication. I think it's similar in that you can give them the medication and it might improve their mood a certain amount, but it'll never sort of deal with the root cause of the issue, which is probably some childhood experience, or it could be a more acute experience they had as an adult, which has caused them some kind of trauma or PTSD or whatever. So I think the drugs help them stabilize, but you need to do the work, right. The kind of psychological work to really get to the cause of it.
How has learning more about the mind-body connection changed your life, or how is it kind of changing the way you go about life? Yeah,
so it's interesting. I guess I became interested in it because I had a personal experience with addiction in my family. And so I've done, spent a long time wondering what the cause of that is. And then just in my self-understanding, I think during COVID it became a lot more popular for people to understand better their, their own kind of mental well-being and what they can do about it. I've more recently started to think about the link between things like physical exercise. I'm training for a half marathon at the moment, so
very nice.
Plug for that.
Plug that one.
I'm feeling a lot better with the regular exercise. I'm finding like dealing with stress at work, for instance, my job can get very stressful because I'm juggling a lot of different things. I'm just better at dealing with it because I have that regular exercise. And I read as well recently that there's a kind of interesting thing around evolution where if you think about the days when we would have been in the wild and the way the nervous system is set up, if we were being threatened by, say, a lion that was preying on us. And it was, we'd spotted a lion, heart rate goes up.
Uh-oh.
Is it, I'm going to get this wrong now, sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous
Sympathetic.
system? That's it.
Yep.
I'm 10 years out from my degree, so forgive me if I forget which one it is.
Actually, how many years am I? It's not 10. Is it 10? Gosh, it's nearly 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's frightening. That is scary.
But still, we remember the fundamental principles.
I think so.
So I think that's the important thing.
Don't push me too hard.
You can always Google it later, I find.
Yeah, so you're sympathetic.
Yeah.
Everything
So the sympathetic nervous system was designed to keep us safe in an environment where we might be physically preyed upon by something that might eat us. But in this day and age, it's still triggered by other factors like things that stress us out essentially or make us anxious, and that could be work, it could be social expectations, could be worrying about something that might never happen. All
psychological stress.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's all triggering the same system. And I read something recently that said, so that's why when people do exercise, it helps with that stress because the system was designed to alert you to a danger. You then run from danger or you act in a physical way, and then it's alleviated and you no longer need to act. And so if you're getting, psychologically stressed, doing some exercise actually helps because I think of it like you're kind of burning off the cortisol or,
I like that a lot.
Yeah. So it
definitely does. It does something to cortisol in the short term and something in the long term, doesn't it? It sort of buffers your cortisol because I'd imagine that like super, super, super intense exercise must increase your cortisol because it's a stress hormone and super intense exercise can be a stressor, but a smaller amount of exercise that gets the endorphins going probably does dampen it down.
Yeah.
And instead of you having chronically elevated cortisol, which is really bad.
Yeah, which then affects so many other systems.
Yeah, it's really, really bad. And you can kind of measure it through your Apple Watch or whatever garment you're using, not that we promote any on this podcast, through looking at your heart rate variability. And that's the measurement over a period of time between like your top beats per minute typically at rest and your lowest beats per minute typically at rest.
My Garmin keeps telling me about that and I have no idea what it means.
Right, okay. I can go a bit further if you want. Yeah, so essentially, and I don't know all the parameters off by heart in terms of what's a good percentage and what's a bad percentage, but there's a percentage difference between your highest and your lowest.
Right.
And the higher that percentage, the better, because it's, suggests that you're going up and you're going down. And you shouldn't have static heart rate.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually sit right with good physiological tone and good cardiovascular tone. It should peak and then trough, often in line with your breathing.
Yeah. And the quicker it comes back to resting, the healthier you are, right?
100%.
That's one thing I'm noticing with training, for sure.
It's coming back down faster.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Like I'll stop running and I can see it come down and I feel it comes down so much quicker.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So this sort of cortisol pathway, I feel like there's the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis.
Right.
And they all do slightly different things. But generally speaking, that kind of fight or flight type response is one of the things that they control in addition to water balance and other important elements. So if that psychological stress or whatever it is constantly going, then you're going to have lots of cortisol going through your body. And one of the manifestations of cortisol is an elevated heart rate because it activates the axis. And that's bad. That's really, really bad. And we talked about my great aunt who's 100 today.
Congratulations to your great aunt.
It's amazing. It's super cool. One of the aspects, I think, which is really important is a stress-free life. Or as close as practically possible to stress-free. You just mentioned
I'm looking off into the distance because I'm thinking, how do you achieve
When's that going to happen? When's it going to happen? Well,
I think that is my side hobby, trying to work that out.
Yeah, well, that's about the mind-body connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
So one of the things I learned recently and listened to recently, which I liked a lot, was, look, all of us go through challenge and adversity. And if you're going through a really stressful period, there's like, if you take the same stressful period and apply it to 100 different people, then people would respond differently. Some people would kind of crumble and have a breakdown. Other people would thrive and get better and improve.
That's because they're leaning on their past experiences to know, have I dealt with this before? Can I do it? Or, no, I've never dealt with this before. I have no idea what to do. I'm more stressed.
Okay, so that's definitely one key aspect that I didn't even consider, and I love that. So let's take that because I agree. The other thing is, do they view it as a challenge that they want to overcome? So some people, and I think I'm actually one of these people, when everything goes wrong, and it does happen, I kind of go, right, this sucks, but there's an opportunity to like build this back up and to come back stronger and to come back better.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe looking back and going, I've done this so many times before, I can do it again, is a key part of it.
Yeah.
But
But some people might think, I've never done this before, and they thrive on that.
Right, they might thrive on that too, exactly. So it's all about the mindset.
Yeah.
How do you view the stress?
Yeah.
And the challenge? Like,
Yeah.
Can you conceptualize it as, well, this is like your half marathon that you're doing. Things are going really badly at the moment at work, or I've got this huge deadline that's coming up. Can you frame it in your mind like it's a marathon or an Ironman or whatever it is you're doing?
Yeah.
That must be one of the key drivers.
Yeah.
So,
well, just on that, I think people can build resilience to how they handle new challenges as well. I think, I don't know, if I just compare myself to some other people that I know, some people might encounter something new. Let's say the older generation with some new technology. That's quite a common example. Oh, I don't know what to do with this. You do it for me. And they get all flustered and they don't even want to try. Whereas I think because of, it was actually during my PhD, I first started building this resilience. I'd come from university where you're essentially spoon-fed the information you need, you regurgitate it back out in exams or essays, to my PhD where no one could actually tell me the answers. I had to find them out for myself. And then there are times where you have time pressure or, pressure to find the answers, and then it gets a lot more stressful. But I had to go through that process of figuring out, okay, I don't know what to do here. There's no safety net. No one else knows what I should do. People might be able to pull together different ideas and brainstorm it with you and, kind of coach you through it. But no one has the answer apart from me, because I remember one of my supervisors said to me, I said, this is so hard, I can't see a way through. And they said, well, of course it's hard because no one's done it before. Right. Otherwise it wouldn't be novel research. Right. So that was actually quite a relief when they said that, because I thought, oh, okay, it's fine that I feel this way then. It's not me being a failure. It's the nature of the beast. It is hard, and I may never find the answer, but that's okay.
Did you find the answer?
For that particular element, I did, yes.
Good. Take me back to, I guess, your first degree and then going into your PhD. So what happened with that?
So I studied physiology for my bachelor's.
Actually, did we not, when we met, you were like, there was some connection over physiology, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's basically when I talk to you about all these interesting things I'm interested in. It mostly comes from that time. It doesn't actually come from a place of expertise, just curiosity.
Got it.
So I did physiology for my undergrad. I actually didn't expect to go into biology at all. I wanted to be a lawyer.
Whoa, okay.
And then realised I could not absorb information about cases and dates at all. Got the worst grades out of any subject I was doing in my A-levels, so I ditched law and thought, well, what else do I enjoy? And it was biology. So I went to do physiology. Considered,
at Cambridge, right?
That was at Liverpool for my undergrad. Considered doing medicine, but decided kind of didn't want the lifestyle associated with medicine.
The degree or afterwards? Both?
Like a career in medicine, yeah. I didn't want a career in medicine. I'm sure it is a great career, but I personally couldn't see myself kind of working shifts and that sort of thing.
Yep.
And then coming towards the end of my physiology degree, I just, didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I was still really curious. So I just kind of wanted to do more study. So I looked at PhD programs that have an integrated master's.
Did you think at that point I might want to go into academia, or did you know that you wanted to do
I thought possibly
something?
Because I was just a very curious person. So I thought, I'll probably go into research. I didn't know, where I might want to practically apply it yet. So I looked at PhD programs, applied to many, got rejected from all of them apart from the one at Cambridge, which is surprising. But
interesting.
Maybe they're looking for something unique. I did. It's a 1+3, so a master's of research plus 3 years of PhD. And so
that sounds like it would be a very highly competitive program, because it's all there, and the PhD's like quote unquote guaranteed. And it was it came with a stipend as well, so I was funded Perfect.
during that time. So I didn't have any more student loans or anything.
Excellent.
So started on that.
And honestly, were you excited about what the PhD topic was, or were you just like excited to...
Well, so one of the benefits is I didn't have to choose the topic before I got onto the programme.
Wow.
Because again, I was still undecided what my interest was in. And one of the beauties is during the master's year, you did 2 research projects and some kind of like modelling and stats experience, which was very new to me at the time. And then towards the end of that master's, you had to kind of be successful in your research projects and write them up and everything. And then you would apply to a particular lab to say, please, can I do my PhD with you?
Got it.
So yeah, it allowed me to explore a little bit further before I decided on this kind of 3-year long commitment.
Awesome.
So,
and when you did your physiology degree, did something click or something spark a little bit where you were like, actually, you know, this is much better than, you know, legal contracts and cases and stuff like that? I'm actually really interested in this.
Yeah. I think it just developed over time. I just realised I was more and more curious. I think the thing about kind of biology that I really enjoy is not, you know, you do have to do a lot of memorising of names of molecules and how things interact and whatnot. It wasn't that aspect that I enjoyed. It was the systems thinking. It's how do systems at different levels work? How do they interact with each other? How do they influence each other? I think that's why I find the brain really interesting, because it's very complicated. There's a lot we still don't understand, and there's so many interactions with other systems and organs in the body. So yeah, I think that's where the interest lies.
That makes sense.
And it's hard to kind of narrow down a specific focus that I would want to drill down into, which probably comes on to why I didn't end up in a career in academia, because I didn't want to focus down and down. I wanted to stay broad.
Tell me more, though, about the PhD before we do that. So you mentioned it built resilience.
Yeah.
You became an expert in a particular thing. What was?
Although I never felt like an expert.
Does anyone really feel like an expert? Maybe you do at some point become an expert.
When you get interviewed on TV about your subject, maybe then you're
You think
expert.
so?
Yeah, I think so.
I think everyone just wings it, though, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Unless you're super, super confident, and maybe like everywhere you go, people applaud you and uphold you as like the ultimate. But I think to some extent, every single person, unless they're like really, really arrogant, has some imposter type syndrome going on at some point.
Yeah.
It definitely exists within absolutely everybody. Some people are just better at masking it and hiding it than others.
Yeah.
And some people just, I think the more confident you seem as well, the more credible and competent you seem.
Yeah.
That kind of, you know, fake it till you make it type thing.
I think true confidence is someone who knows what they know and what they don't know. During my PhD days, I saw a few memes, and it was something about what your family think you know, what your colleagues think you know, and what you think you know, and what you actually know, and it's like tiny amount.
Yeah.
And I think someone who's truly confident is aware of how little they know, and is aware of what they are still yet to learn.
Right.
There's even a concept in government about, well, it's used in government. It wasn't coined in government, but known knowns, known unknowns,
And unknown
knowns, and unknown unknowns.
Love that.
So if you can kind of map those, then you are truly confident about your subject.
I like that a lot.
It's the people who think they know everything and they don't. They're the arrogant ones.
Right. I mean, I get really deeply uncomfortable when people are like, "Yeah, you're a microbiome expert." I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
No. I'm not. I'm genuinely not. I've had the privilege over the course of this podcast of speaking to lots of people who know way more about their subject than I do. And 7 years of trying to start a company that's developing a new drug. And over the years, you do pick stuff up, but at no point.
You're probably much better read than it depends who's telling you you're the expert. It's all relative, I think.
Right.
To the average member of the public. Yeah, you're absolutely an expert.
Possibly, yeah.
And you're not just a theoretical expert, you've got the practical expertise as well, which a lot of people don't have.
Of company formation, and this is something you're doing now, though, as well. Did we establish if you could talk about
Yes.
that? You are allowed to talk about that. Okay, that's excellent. Well, we'll get onto that. So what were some of the hardest parts then of the PhD? How did you overcome them? And then what happened next?
Yeah. I was reflecting on this on the way over here, trying to remind myself. So I finished the PhD 6 years ago.
Did you start the PhD with bundles of energy? And by the last year, if anyone asked you about your PhD, you were like, don't ask me about my PhD.
Yeah, no, it is very true. It is very true. Although I actually had the privilege of having a cut-off deadline when I had to submit my thesis, no extensions allowed, whereas most people can extend into a fourth year and typically are not funded during that time. And that's when it can kind of drag on and on and on, and people get really frustrated. But I had a hard cut-off, so actually that was quite a relief for me because I knew the pain is going to be over by this stage. So yeah, I think in the early stages, just very curious, kind of early scoping conversations with my supervisor, who's, he was very energetic and enthusiastic. I really appreciated being supervised by him. This was Professor Bill Harris, who has retired now, but, still emeritus professor at Cambridge or something like that.
Is he like a big name in the field?
Yeah, he was the head of the Department for Physiology, Development and Neuroscience.
Awesome.
Yeah, great character as well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
They typically are, aren't they?
Yeah.
People like that.
And so early conversations about he'd had some ideas. Oh, I wonder what's happening here. So his lab mostly focused on the genetic factors that influence cell fate in the retina. So for the more technical audience, you have kind of pluripotent stem cells that are already designated to become retinal neurons by that stage as the retina starts to form. And then his lab was investigating what are the genetic factors that tell these cells to become the 5 main neuronal cell types in the retina.
That's cool.
And then he'd started to get a bit more curious about some other aspects. So my project, when I came in, then became a question around how do these cells know how to organize into the right layers is it once they've formed? Is it during their formation? And so I basically tried to tease apart the cellular and molecular mechanisms around, are these cells just communicating with each other to kind of sort out, as neighbours, I go here, you go there, as long as we're on the right side of each other, we're in the right place.
Right.
Or there's a lot of kind of common developmental biology signals and cues, were any of those playing a role? So that was a little bit different from what he previously looked at. So I found that really interesting, that I was kind of really getting to just explore and be creative in the early stages.
So to kind of summarise then, there are these cells in the eye which have the potential to become anything. They're pluripotent. Yeah,
by the time they're in the physical position of the retina, they're already going to become retinal cells, but they would have descended from some cells that could have become anything. Yeah.
And you were trying to figure out what are the determinants, what are the drivers of the transformation from you have the potential to be anything cell to you're a retina cell in the eye.
So that's what Bill's lab did more broadly, looking at the genetic determinants. He then got interested in like physical cues, so like what position they're in, because there are external factors that can influence it as well. It's not just genetics of the cell.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now that I know you said you're not religious and things like that, but when you hear about something as so finely tuned, but also reproducible insofar as it must have happened to every single person on the planet alive today.
Yeah.
Does that not get you thinking a little bit about sort of intelligent design and...
So intelligent design is genetics, I think.
Yeah.
The more you study, the more you believe that it's possible, in that, obviously evolution is kind of the influencing factor that determines which genes get passed on or not. And the eye is probably one of the most important organs in the body if you are to survive. If you develop defective vision and you're in an environment where you're getting preyed upon, you're going to get eaten pretty quickly. You're not going to pass on your genes. Yep. And so at least that's what some of the literature says is why eyes have developed, in a very similar way in so many different organisms. But yeah, no, it's still, again, we don't know enough about how the eye actually develops to know if it is exactly the same.
It's the eye, but it must be the eye and the brain's sort of control over the eye. Because, if you do really, really intense breathing exercises, which you may have not done yet, but you will do if you're on the mind-body journey, or you take psychedelics, they sort of change your brain chemistry in such a way so that you perceive different colours and vibrations and patterns and things that you otherwise don't. And it wouldn't be evolutionary from an evolutionary point of view.
Yeah.
it would be, I think, quite disadvantageous to perceive the world as you perceive it if you're on LSD or magic mushrooms all the time, because you'd just be like, wow, this microphone's really amazing. And you look at your microphone for 12 hours and then you're eaten by a tiger or something like that. So it must be both the eyes and the brain's like control over the eyes.
Yeah. So I think the eye is a bit more basic in that it's mostly kind of like an external sensor. It's mostly sensing things. I don't think the brain is signaling to the eye in terms of how it interprets the signals coming in. That interpretation is done in the brain, in the visual cortex.
Right.
I think the brain probably just controls the eye from a motor perspective. So where the eye looks, how the iris contracts, that sort of thing. So psychedelics probably impacting the visual cortex, I would imagine, rather than that makes sense. What the eyes are actually perceiving in the first
So maybe
instance.
it's to do with like uncloaking the brain's filtering of all the signals and energy and things like that.
And there's other things. The reason we have two eyes is because the angle by which you see something, you can't develop depth perception unless you've got both eyes looking at it, because they're looking at it from different angles.
Oh, that's cool.
And the brain does a lot of filling in the gaps as well. So there's things where you can read. I've seen things, as long as the first letter of a word is right, you can interpret what the rest of it.
Amazing.
You're not really reading the full word. You're kind of probably bringing in memories and experiences to fill in the blanks.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how I got us on psychedelics and intelligent design, but nothing's off limits.
I'm interested in psychedelics from a kind of mental health perspective too.
So am I.
Yeah.
So am I. Well, we can talk about that then. So magic mushroom psilocybin has been approved in Australia for treatment of, I think it's refractory depression.
Right.
And then there's MDMA as well, which has been approved for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Is that in a microdosing situation, or is that...
No, it's
right.
it's not in a microdosing situation. So microdosing is actually quite controversial within the medical community. So it's been pushed very hard, I think, by the sort of Silicon Valley entrepreneur type people, and also
trying to commercialise it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if even it's commercialisation. So it's quite difficult to define what a microdose actually is, and it's difficult to determine in the clinical setting or scientific setting if a microdose actually has any impact at all, because you need to study it for quite a long time, and the purported benefits to microdosing are like subtle changes to mood, subtle changes to creativity, and creativity is hard to measure and define. And other things like just improved general sense of well-being, that kind of thing.
So hard to measure, isn't it?
So
and it's so
difficult.
subjective.
It's so difficult.
So many other factors that influence it.
So difficult. But some people swear by it, and it's popular. It's more popular now than it probably has been in decades.
Right.
But the MDMA and the psilocybin is like a bigger, like measurably, demonstrably psychoactive dose of both substances. So I think in the MDMA case, I don't know what milligrams it is, but it's a large enough dose to make people high and to sort of generate all the, in this context, beneficial effects associated with MDMA. So the empathy, the general sense of kind of contentment, the ability to talk about things you otherwise wouldn't be able to talk about. And that's all beneficial in the context of a guided psychotherapy session. And you talked about the childhood trauma earlier. It allows people to
unlock
dig
some of the
and
traumas,
unlock and to talk and to work through things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And it's very, very effective. Most of the research has been pushed in the US through this non-profit organization called MAPS. I forgot the founder's name, but it's this incredible guy who's raised, as a non-profit, he's raised hundreds of millions to do phase 3 studies of MDMA versus placebo. And it's like, how is that even possible? And then on the psilocybin side, it's for depression, and I'm not as familiar with the research. And there's also intranasal ketamine and things like that coming through now as well. So it's all super exciting stuff. Think about the toolkit that might be available for patients with depression in 3 to 5 years' time. And of course, there might be a microbiome component, but there might also be the psychedelic component as well. And I think Australia seems to be far ahead. In many states, not many states, but in some states in the US now, magic mushrooms, broadly termed to describe mushrooms that contain psilocybin, which is a psychoactive component, are also legal. truffles illegal in Amsterdam. So I think, hopefully there's a shift in the medical communities and the government's view on these substances in terms of medicinal properties. The challenge obviously relates to, well, there'll always be a black market, and how do drug companies develop these? Can they patent these things? And because if there's no pharma interest, then they're not going to achieve scale.
Yeah.
You can think what you want about big pharma and their business practices and so on, but they are the engines of drug distribution and also, to an extent, drug development. So I think at societal level, and this also involves government, we could do more, I think, to stimulate research in the field of psychedelics. And it has the potential to benefit so many people. So what have you been learning about it?
So there's a documentary, I think, on Netflix. The name escapes me.
I think I've watched it as well.
Yeah, where a journalist just kind of tries different drugs and
watched it.
Goes through his own personal journey. So that's really interesting.
It's a good documentary, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, it relates back to my physiology studies. I was just really interested to understand, which neuronal pathways are these affecting and that sort of thing. And because it's such a big thing in society, isn't it? So many people take drugs illegally.
Right.
So, yeah, then there's the research angle. I think it's a little bit chicken and egg in that we don't know enough about the potential benefits and the harms of these drugs unless we do research on them.
Right.
But you need to be confident that the harms aren't too bad to do the research.
Yep.
Which, that's definitely playing into kind of government policy around it, which I obviously don't work on, but I am aware that, it's quite chicken and egg problem, I think. So if, others, non-profits are doing this research, maybe that helps provide some of the answers, leads the way.
There's non-profits and there's actually companies who are for-profit trying to develop psychedelic drugs or, I guess, non-traditional pharmaceuticals as medicines. And there's challenges associated with that. So the intellectual property position is challenging because there's so much precedence, decades long, maybe even...
But some of these come from naturally forming plants.
There's that as well, for sure. And that's a key element as well. But if something's been used for hundreds of years, then is it really possible to patent whatever it is within that? So that's a challenge. One of the other challenges is actually the design of placebo-controlled studies.
Right, yeah.
So, if there's an effect on the mind, I think it must be quite obvious that you've not had a placebo.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're like, hi.
Yeah.
So that's also a challenge.
Yeah.
And then one of the other key challenges is, do you have to trip or not? And that brings you back to your microdosing comment. Do you have to have a trip? Do you have to be tripping to get the benefits, or can you get the benefits without tripping?
Yeah, good question. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I really, really don't know.
I imagine the trip is kind of a symptom, but it's not the cause of the effect.
Possibly, but you also think about things very differently when you're tripping.
Right.
So it might be that...
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, and to be fair, I obviously wouldn't know either. But you do think about things differently.
Yeah.
I'm told, and as I've read many times, because I did my dissertation on MDMA and cannabis back in the day. My physiology dissertation was on MDMA and cannabis, and the first company I tried to start actually was a drink for people that were taking MDMA to try and offset some of the serotonergic neurotoxicity.
Wow. Yeah.
Obviously, it wasn't successful. Otherwise, I'd still probably be doing that, or I'd have a better story to tell. But it didn't kind of lift off. And then we got into the microbiome. Anyways, going back to your story then. So that what happened at the end of the PhD, and then what happens next is really quite interesting, isn't it? So
yeah. So I very much enjoyed my PhD. I enjoyed, kind of creating a hypothesis, I had to do a lot of exploring to kind of figure out how I was actually going to address the question, which is how do these cells know how to get into the right position? So in the retina, they form really lovely, organized layers. We had a beautiful model by which we could visualize the cells with lovely, pretty colors using high-powered microscopy.
That's cool.
It's called the Spectrum of Fate's Zebrafish Retina, if anyone wants to have a look at some pretty pictures.
Nice.
And so I enjoyed the process for sure. But there were lots of highs and lows throughout that process.
Yep.
We call it the roller coaster of anxiety in the research world.
Okay.
And yeah, I remember one day I was sitting at the microscope and a colleague was at the microscope next to me and he was like, so you've got a year left. Like, what are you going to do next? Are you going to start applying for postdocs? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I can kind of ride this roller coaster continuously. And in academia, you have to take, a 2-year contract here, a 2-year contract in another city or country. Yep. You have to move around so much before you get a tenured position. There's a lot of kind of uncertainty associated with it. And, I was in Cambridge and I could see my colleagues in a good university still having to deal with all this uncertainty in their career. So started to think it wasn't for me. But my colleague asked me the best question he could have asked me. He said, so, well, you say you enjoy it. So which elements do you enjoy now? Okay. And can you find that somewhere else?
It's a good one for the listeners as well, isn't it? Which elements do you enjoy?
When you're struggling with a decision and you're feeling very torn, it's probably because you do enjoy something. So kind of take the time to focus on what is it that you enjoy and where can you find that somewhere else. And for me, it was the big picture thinking and the problem solving and trying to do things in different ways that hadn't been done before. That's what I enjoyed doing. Mm-hmm. I still enjoyed talking about scientific research. I just didn't want to be in the lab, trying to make cells survive and stop them getting infected and all of the things that can go wrong very easily in research and keep you up at night and make you go into the lab at the weekends and things. That was a light bulb moment for me. Mm-hmm. I then, at the university, they were doing some kind of info sessions on the role of science in policy. So I went along to some of those and I realised, policy, that's what I want to work in because they're basically problem solvers on a bigger scale. And there is a role for science in that as well because I really didn't want to let go of my science background. I'd worked so hard to develop that kind of knowledge and skill set. So I started just searching around for opportunities. I literally Googled science and policy. And it came up with the science and engineering fast stream in the civil service. So they only recruit for that once a year. So I signed up to the mailing list to be alerted when the next round was open. And then, and then it alerted me and I made the application, but still didn't really know that much about policy or if I would be successful. I heard it was very competitive and it was quite a long application process. But this was still at least 6 months out from finishing my PhD, so I had time.
So you've been very proactive about it.
Yeah.
Did you have a very excited feeling in your guts when you attended that policy thing? Because
So the sessions that I went to where they kind of they were aimed at educating academics around the role of science in policy making, and they did some scenarios where I think they were talking about funding for personalised medicines at the time, which is an interesting topic.
That's very cool.
And it was saying, the question was, do you fund these more general medicines that can benefit a large population, or do you fund medicines that will only affect one or two people? But, and then they were asking the audience for kind of comments and things to consider, and people were saying, well, how do we advance the research if we don't fund any of these personalised medicines? We'll never have medicines for these people. It spiked my curiosity.
Can I just push you a little bit on your own personal opinion on that one? Do you have a view on how to divvy up the funding in terms of personalised medicine?
I don't know if I have a personal view. I understand some of the challenges associated with those decisions. So when we're talking about public funding, my official civil service hat on, obviously, we need to consider what's the best value for taxpayers' pound. And we have to think about what benefits the most people. But it's, that's not the only factor that is included in that decision. How do you advance the research if you don't fund something? And there are plenty of initiatives within government that advance more innovative research as well.
Right.
but I can't comment on, how NICE or the NHS make decisions about which medicines they actually give out.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Just one comment, which I think you might find quite amusing or interesting. You're working on setting up a company at the moment. You will have a standard company line, just like you've got your standard government civil servant line, where you will say, we'll do what's in the shareholders' best interests, or what gives the shareholders best value for money. So I think there's a lot of parallels between what you're doing at the moment and what you're soon to be doing with the company you're setting up. And I'm really excited to start talking about that. But presumably, because of what you're doing now, you got into the program.
Yes, I did.
And you've now had a career in the civil service.
Yeah.
Maximising value for the taxpayer.
Yeah.
Which I know you've been doing.
It's not all just money, though.
No, it's not. Of course not.
Yeah.
But it seems like you really enjoy it based on our interactions.
Yeah.
And when we met, it was at a networking event. And I can't remember how we started to chat.
I think I asked you what your company does.
I think you're
And then you told me it was FMT, and I was like, oh my God, I've heard about that in the veterinary world. That's really cool that you're doing in humans.
Yeah, that's right.
And again, nothing to do with my day job, just from my curiosity from my physiology studies, I think.
And I loved the energy and enthusiasm you had for everything that we were doing, even though it wasn't within your kind of day-to-day wheelhouse. And then we got chatting about what you're up to and also what connections you can make for me, perhaps, to help Enterobiotics within your network and so on, because there were investors at that event.
The event. So the event was was an event
US
organised.
Investor Network, right?
Yeah, it was a kind of government-supported event to matchmake CEOs of biotech startups like yourselves with venture capitalists from the US. Yeah, that's
right. Yeah, and it was good. I really enjoyed it. And then we started talking about the podcast, and here you are on a canal boat in London. But it's a super cool venue, actually, isn't it? I'm loving the view. It feels very tranquil and relaxing, actually. Whilst we discuss these,
I can literally see the light kind of reflecting off the water and the trees. It's nice.
Very special and very unique. I've been to many studios now because I travel a lot and try and coordinate a podcast with somewhere I'm traveling to. And no harm to the guys in Glasgow, by the way, because I love Podcast Studio Glasgow. But this is definitely the coolest studio I've been in so far. Yeah, it's really, really cool. I think it's class. Yeah. Sorry, back to your journey through the civil service. So could you just give us a whistle-stop tour, and then we'll land on the Dementia mission, which you're currently leading. Yeah. And we can talk about some of the challenges and your learnings, and then really dig into this, what you're up to now, because it's super cool.
Yeah, sure. So entered via the science and engineering fast stream. So that's a slightly more specialist track. There is a general fast stream as well. And but the science and engineering one, you'll be placed in postings that always have a science or engineering focus. So that's why I was interested in that. And after a very long application process, you finally start, and it typically runs for 3 years, and you'll do various postings during that time. So I did a posting at the time it was called the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. That has, as a department, recently gone through a ministerial of government change. It's called the MOG. I can't remember what the M stands for. So that's
the acronym for the government-driven change, the AMOG.
Yeah, it's when the Prime Minister basically says, I'm going to dissolve this department or create this department.
It's called the MOG.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I bet there's so many acronyms like that.
Oh, yeah. Keeps us on our toes. Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy was my first posting in the Energy Innovation team.
Energy innovation? So,
innovation associated with the use of energy. The team specifically called Science and Innovation for Climate and Energy. And my first posting was to design an innovation competition that would develop tools to better measure the thermal performance of homes.
Wow, straight in there then, in the deep end.
That's what I was told on day one. You're going to design a competition to develop these technologies.
You went from the retina in the eye and pluripotent stem cells to insulation of homes.
Yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I actually reflected a few weeks in. I thought, oh my God, it's like doing another PhD, but in a subject I've never studied before.
Yeah, wow.
So if any scientists out there want a new challenge, you want to change field, come into government.
Yep.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I remember I had to get up to speed by engaging. We had some experts internally who were engineers, physicists, knew all about thermal efficiency. We had policymakers who were designing policy around this that I needed to get up to speed with in terms of if these tools were to become available, which is the intention of the innovation competition, how would they benefit your policies? So they helped us feed into the design of the competition. And then
When you say competition, like what kind of sums of money were available?
the scope of that was £5 million in total. Projects could have ranged between 100,000 and £1 million each.
So serious funding.
Yeah.
Serious funding.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the other kind of new thing for me. It was, oh my God, we're talking about millions now.
It's not a grant for tens of thousands.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
£1 million plus. But I suppose,
Yeah.
I hope we can touch on, I know you've got things you can and can't talk about, but how we can best support companies.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I say you, I mean government. And I think there could be closer collaboration between the two.
Well, that's part of the mission approach, actually. So, yeah, we can talk about that.
Absolutely. And then one of the other things I think, as companies grow, they go in this like bumpy kind of journey, and people talk about something called the Valley of Death, where, where you've got some funding, but you're not quite revenue generating yet. You've not quite had proof of concept, but no investor wants to fund you over that kind of pre-proof of concept to proof of concept. Some companies just need a big injection of support to get over the line, particularly in a market like this, where there's loads of money in the private markets right now, but the money's not being deployed. So they have to invest at some point. They can't just sit on the money forever.
Yeah.
But right now, investors are very cautious. And this is maybe an opportunity for government to step in or up, whatever you want to describe it as, and fund some companies who are on that trajectory. The challenge must be, though, which companies do you fund and how much do you fund, because you've got finite resource, and that's something you're working on with your competition. So how was the learning experience over the course of the thermal insulation competition?
Steep.
Yep.
So, yeah, first few weeks, just trying to get up to speed. What are these technologies? How do they work? What are we trying to develop here? That was a process of many months, actually, engaging internal stakeholders. So, like I said, we had some internal experts, we had policymakers. Eventually, I had to take these to approvals committees to sort of say, this is the challenge we're trying to address. Here's the state of the art of the possible. We think, this should be the scope of the competition because we believe these types of technologies may produce these solutions. But in the interim, I had to engage so much with the sector to understand the art of the possible. So I was engaging with academics to understand what's the literature saying at the moment, what could be possible or what is, never going to be possible. I was engaging with companies to understand what are they currently investing in. And again, their view, because there are researchers in academia and in companies that will be forming a view of what's possible. And then also engaging with companies to understand their kind of commercial strategy. So if, whatever technology you're working on became available, would you scale it? How would you apply it? That sort of thing. So a lot of engagement with the sector before we form a view of how we think best to address the challenges. And then it goes through internal processes to kind of, we essentially pitch what we think the solution should be, and then these approvals committees, tell us, have we generated enough evidence to support that? Is it robust? Everything like that.
Wow.
So that's the fascinating part of the job, is the stakeholder engagement, I find, and I do a lot of that in my current role now. So that's what I enjoy the most. I get to learn from the experts without having to do the research myself.
Right.
I get to absorb a lot very quickly, and then bring people together to form a common view. I have to translate a lot of technical stuff for a lay audience quite often, whether it's for these approvals committees, whether it's for ministers, for instance, who want to be briefed on the latest developments in a particular area, or maybe they're going to be making an announcement about something, or making decisions about the scope of what we're doing. So yeah, that's the most interesting part of the job. But shall I carry on with in terms
Please.
of what other roles I've done?
Please, yeah.
In government. So that was my first role, which I did for a year.
And did it kind of go well?
It did. Yeah. The competition got launched. I wasn't around by the time they'd actually decided which companies got funded, but I was told afterwards, and that was very satisfying.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So those projects are running. They were successful enough. They got approval to spend more money and do a second competition. So
it sounds like you smashed it. Well done.
With it's not a one man effort. It's engaging with everyone and bringing it all together.
Right.
And then my second posting, I actually went out on secondment. So I went to the science, the Centre for Science and Policy in Cambridge. It just happened so that I went back to Cambridge, which was nice. And they do some really interesting things. They bring academics into conversations with policymakers through various forums. So either they'll organise workshops around specific policy challenges, often the kind of more forward-thinking questions. So rather than this immediate policy challenge we have right now, what should we be considering about the future of the challenges or opportunities in this area? And they'll bring like really quite a diverse group of academics and industry stakeholders together as well, and charities, to kind of run these workshops and think about what should we be considering in the longer term. They also have like a fellowship program where policymakers and also industry people can sign up to this fellowship and have a series of meetings organised with different academics that they want to inform their approach and maybe broaden their thinking. Mm-hmm. And then they do other things as well. They have a senior leadership programme where senior leaders in government can go and have their minds stimulated by all these academics.
Oh, really?
Broader thinking, yeah.
That's cool.
So it's it's
probably quite important, isn't it, that people who are senior in government can readily access people who are at the forefront of a particular field. Particularly if it relates to legislation or policy, right? They want to make sure that it's appropriate and proper in the context of where does the field sit right now in terms of research. So
and I think it's good to take the time out to do some of that broader thinking as well, because in government we can sometimes get so focused on I've got this challenge I need to solve right now.
Right.
You kind of need to make the time to go out and explore a bit more and be curious again, and broaden your thinking. So it's good to have, organisations that can facilitate that thinking.
Definitely.
So I worked there for 6 months, setting up a kind of new forum by which they bring academics in to work on particular policy issues that are kind of more longer term. So we were setting up some things around environmental land management at the time, and then started to explore some projects with Department of Health and Social Care. But Brexit kind of got in the way of a lot of that, unfortunately. No one could commit to setting up any new projects because they didn't know what was happening with Brexit.
Did this process last years? Because obviously Brexit didn't happen overnight. Or do you mean the actual launch of Brexit post-Brexit?
I think it was as we would as government was working out what it was actually going to do to deliver Brexit.
Okay.
There was obviously a lot of uncertainty for a long time.
So how many prime ministers have you kind of worked in the civil service under?
Ooh, good question. Theresa May was the first prime minister. Okay. And then how many have we had since Boris Johnson?
Theresa,
Liz Truss.
Boris, Liz, Rishi.
Yeah.
So 4.
Yeah.
4 in total. Interesting.
And many of those changes in very recent years.
Yeah.
And many ministerial changes as well.
Okay.
Yeah. The last year have been a lot of changes for us.
Right. And that must be, I guess, in some respects quite challenging because you have a path and it maybe changes. Yeah. But how did you then arrive at what you're doing now, which is dementia? And describe to me what your role is, because you're the lead of a mission.
Yes.
And I think it's good for the listener to understand what a mission.
Yeah.
In government terms, what a mission is.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a new thing. So sort of, long story short, did a few other placements, got some different experience around government, which is the point of the fast stream. Get broad experience. Some different departments have slightly different ways of working. working on different scientific engineering challenges, different policy challenges, different types of stakeholder, etc. So I finished a couple of other placements, and then
before we jump into dementia, sorry, I know I asked us to move on there, but what were some of the best things, the highlights, if you like, in terms of your own development and learning about working for civil service, working for the government?
Yeah.
The variety?
Yes, variety. Working collaboratively with people, I think, is the other thing I love. And also kind of working on big challenges, sometimes from quite an early stage where you have quite a lot of freedom to be creative and think, really, how should we address this? And then working with the experts to work out the art of the possible. I think that's really what I enjoy so much. Yeah. And I've always working in the science or engineering space. I've always worked on quite innovative projects. Obviously there are a lot of functions within government that are more processy and kind of keep functions running, but I've always been in the more innovative space. So that's really fascinating. And government's quite big and has a lot of leverage sometimes, a lot of funding to play with. So yeah, it feels like quite a privilege to be able to work in this space.
And you can make an impact.
Yes, absolutely.
How big an impact are you going to make in dementia? Big.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think it's also a time of a lot of change in the dementia space, and so it's a good time that government is getting involved. One of the challenges is almost where do we focus, because there's so many opportunities to speed things along at the moment.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So what does the mission mean, and what's your role entail then as the mission lead?
Yeah. So in 2019, government published a strategy called the Life Sciences Vision. And this looks at some of the kind of cross-sector challenges across the life sciences sector. So for the sort of broader audience, government considers life sciences as both what sort of the pharma sector and the data and tech sector are doing, but also healthcare. And then there's kind of basic research and translational research as well. A lot of that is covered by other areas of government from where I sit, but I do engage closely with those teams in the dementia space. So the Life Sciences Vision looks at some of the cross-sector challenges and opportunities, such as data, genomics, patient engagement, all that sort of thing. And then it also looks at some healthcare-specific challenges. So they specifically chose areas of highest burden, both to the population, people and their carers, but also economic burden.
Right.
So the diseases that are most prevalent, affecting people the most, highest impact on society, and also highest cost. And then and within that, we set up a series of missions to tackle those different disease areas. I'll go on to that in a moment, but there's another element of the Life Sciences Vision that looks at kind of investment into UK life sciences businesses as well, which is, they do that through engaging with companies to understand what their strategies are, how they can get them to invest in the UK versus elsewhere. Things around clinical trials, for instance, convincing companies to come do their clinical trials here versus elsewhere, and then supporting startups and growing SMEs such as yourselves as well. What can we do to create the right environment to support homegrown businesses?
Awesome.
Shall I move on to the missions?
Yeah,
then?
go for it, yeah.
So the missions were chosen because they represent the disease areas of highest burden. I'm going to forget one or two, I'm sure, but we have a mission in dementia, which is what I lead on. We have one in cancer, mental health, addiction, obesity, and then I think we have 2 or 3 other missions which don't currently have funding attached to them. And so each mission looks at where are the challenges and the current unmet need in that area, and basically each mission lead is working with the relevant stakeholders in the sector, but also internally to work out how they address those challenges. So in dementia, the challenges are in the translational space. So how do we bring through lots of research going on in the basic and translational space through to how do we actually get new treatments available to patients as soon as possible? So we're focusing on looking at what can we do in the biomarker space. So biomarkers measure any aspect of the disease that tells you whether you have the disease, whether it's progressing or not. We can go on to describe different types of biomarkers if it's of interest. But we're also looking at how can we better run clinical trials in the UK for dementia, which are particularly challenging and costly to run. And we're told is one of the main challenges to pharma developing new treatments.
For sure.
So, yeah, we're engaging across the sector with all types of stakeholders to understand where we should be focusing. But we've narrowed it down so far to the biomarkers and the clinical trials. We are also working with other actors such as NHS England to understand how do other areas in the system need to prepare for potential new treatments coming through.
That makes sense. So you're leading... Is it too far to say you are the lead for...
Yeah, I am the lead of the dementia mission.
You are the lead.
But the mission doesn't cover everything in dementia.
But it's not being over dramatic or sensationalizing it to say the vision said we need to do more in dementia.
Yeah.
And you're leading the government's efforts to do
Yeah.
that. It's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. That's really cool. I love that. So what's your vision then for how you might be able to impact within the biomarker and the trial side of things? And just before you do that, actually, can I just bring you back to what you said? You said something about it's a really exciting time for dementia.
Yeah.
Why is that?
There are two new disease-modifying therapies that have had successful phase 3 clinical trials, according to everybody. So it's the first time that these phase 3 trials have showed much promise. And yeah, essentially everybody's kind of talking about them and wondering what needs to happen if they are to be approved. So they still need to go for approval by the MHRA and then by NICE. And the NHS England would also need to...
Reimburse.
They would need to prepare themselves for if these drugs get approved. How do they find the patients who will be likely to respond well to these drugs? How do they diagnose them? How do they administer the treatments? How do they monitor and follow their progress? There are some safety concerns associated with with these drugs, as there are with most first-in-class drugs, and all drugs have side effects associated with them. But so there's a lot to work through in terms of understanding who can get these drugs and how the NHS would need to prepare for them.
And my understanding is that they've received approval in the US.
Yes, by the FDA.
By the FDA. And there was like a conditional approval for one of them in January, and then they got the full approval in July.
Yeah.
But there's like a black box warning for safety because some people have really negative, bad reactions to them. And they're given into the veins. I think so. Once every couple of weeks.
It requires a clinical appointment to be administered,
right?
Which is one of the challenges.
That's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
And I guess, is it fair to say that within Alzheimer's disease, which is what these drugs were approved for, Alzheimer's being the most common cause of dementia being a constellation of co-occurring symptoms symptoms and signs relating to basically how your brain's working.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here to describe it. You're doing a much better job than I would.
Thank you, I'm trying my best. We do have drugs to treat symptoms, but these were the first two drugs to actually try and alter the course of the disease, as you mentioned.
So they're called disease-modifying therapies.
And is it fair to say that there's kind of two camps in the what causes Alzheimer's disease camp? There's those that believe in something called the tau hypothesis, and there's those that believe in something called the beta amyloid hypothesis.
Yeah.
And the tau people believe that these tau kind of aggregates,
tangles,
neurofibrous tangles within the neurons are what's causing the neurons, i.e. the brain nerve cells, to not work.
Yeah.
And in the amyloid group, there are these plaques that form where these like bundles of neurons get kind of stuck together.
So the plaques form between the neurons and stop them signaling to each other. Yeah.
Got it. And these drugs target the
amyloid beta.
The amyloid beta.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So as you kind of go through stakeholder engagement, how firm are some people on it's definitely tau and some people on it's definitely beta amyloid?
I think the field generally does not have a consensus. There will be some people who've kind of researched a hypothesis and, they're much more tied to that than others. I think industry don't have consensus. Pharma companies will have been developing a particular drug that targets one element of the disease mechanism. And so obviously their interests lie more with that pathway, but not to say that they disregard all other pathways. It's just that they've chosen to focus in one area. Just to go back to your comment about the theories sit in two camps, I think there's more than just amyloid beta and tau, but those are the kind of later stage, how do I describe? It's the later part of the disease mechanism pathway.
Right. Got it.
There are theories emerging now about actually something going on much earlier that causes that, and they think inflammation plays a big part as well.
Stress.
Yeah.
Stress.
This may be where we end up making the link between the gut and Alzheimer's.
Get there eventually, yeah.
Yeah. So, so that there are research studies exploring many other avenues, and I think in reality the brain is so complex. And by the way, both amyloid and tau exist in natural levels in the body. It's something that starts to go wrong with both of them.
And the gut, there's something about the gut. The microbes can produce amyloid type.
I don't actually know exactly what it does.
There's something there. There's something about the microbes in the gut producing beta amyloid.
Right.
Something there. I'm not an expert. Maybe.
So it does.
Were there further discussion? Yeah.
Yeah. So it does have a normal function in the body. It's just the disease mechanism triggers something to start going wrong, and then they aggregate into these clumps that sort of physically get stuck in between neurons, stop the signaling of neurons, and when neurons stop signaling, then they die.
Got it.
The field is starting to think something's happening much earlier on. Obviously, current treatments have the most evidence around amyloid and tau at the moment, and that's where companies have invested to date.
And they've invested a lot, right?
Yeah. I think they've been investing for 30 years around this.
Now they've finally got some approvals.
Yeah. So this is, well, they don't have the approvals yet.
In the UK.
Yeah. In the US. So this is why it's a very exciting time, and I feel very privileged to be,
absolutely,
involved
You're right at
in
the
it.
cutting edge.
Yeah,
Really right at the cutting edge.
But yeah, so part of the mission is to work out where should we be supporting efforts. Should we be supporting the treatments that are closest to being clinically accessible? Should we be supporting earlier stage theories and hypotheses and trying to help bring them through? Mm-hmm. I think we haven't landed yet, but in reality, it'll be a mix. We kind of want to make sure that we stimulate the pipeline of things coming through. And the biomarkers reflect that. So which biomarkers do we focus on reflects what the research is saying in terms of which disease mechanisms we think are influencing these diseases, which, new therapies might be coming through. The biomarkers basically support that by providing actual evidence of what is happening, as patients are being looked at for these diseases, as they're being given treatments. Are those treatments having effects?
And maybe we can give the products earlier so people don't progress. And that might, if they're disease modifying, then the earlier the better.
Yeah.
Because is your view that, so it's still fair to say there's no cure for Alzheimer's?
No.
And maybe some forms of dementia are reversible, but dementia caused by late stage Alzheimer's is not. So what we're talking about here is these drugs slow the progression.
Yeah. So they've shown between a 27 and a 35% reduction in cognitive decline over an 18-month period.
Wow.
So that's just the period that the trials ran for.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely
it's transformational.
Yeah, it's a big change, but there's still questions around what does that mean for the patient? How much longer are they able to do certain things? That sort of thing. So there's a lot more to be studied.
I hear you.
But yeah, we haven't had anything that, robustly slows decline before.
It's amazing.
So yeah, it's a very exciting time.
I'm excited as well.
Yeah.
So we've got probably, 5 or 10 minutes left. I think we're a little bit over time, aren't we? It's all good. We just keep going. Okay, cool. We'll just keep going then.
Great. I don't feel like we've only just gotten started.
I know. Well, that's great. That's good. That's the best kind of podcast. And we talked about all sorts of interesting things. So before you came on, we had a discussion about creating a company. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So the ambition around biomarkers, we've been looking at how do we actually do this. So government can fund research in lots of different ways. It can either fund kind of researchers directly, kind of career fellowships or grant programs and whatnot. Mm-hmm. It can fund specific research projects. It can do innovation competitions. What we're trying to do here is do this in partnership with the sector because, we understand we are not the experts who know what needs to be done. The experts are the people who have been trying to solve this problem for the last 30 years. And these biomarkers will ultimately benefit those who are creating the treatments. And so we want to do this in collaboration with industry. And so we've been looking at what models will best suit that. So we've been exploring a public-private partnership, which is basically where government and private sector stakeholders co-invest into a program and run the program together.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we've been exploring lots of different models for this. Public-private partnerships are quite common in terms of infrastructure projects, very large infrastructure projects that government wants to kind of get going with and will have massive public benefit, but ultimately then the private sector will invest in and also benefit from. In R&D, it's a little bit more novel, but there are some initiatives that have been set up. So there's an initiative called Our Future Health, which has only been set up in recent years. People may have seen adverts for it. It's kind of asking people to come forwards and have a kind of basic set of tests done that might measure their baseline health. And then they can kind of go onto a registry by which they can be selected for further studies.
Clinical studies.
Yeah. So we're looking at potentially a model similar to that. So we think potentially we have to literally work out how do we commercialise this. So potentially setting up a company that has co-investment from government and industry. And then there are lots of challenges associated with that we're still working through.
Has it ever been done before, to the best of your knowledge, in the UK for like health-related policy? I hear what you're saying about Our Future Health, and that makes a lot of sense. But you're maybe talking about something slightly different. You're talking about...
So it's similar in the way that we're looking at potentially a company with charitable status. So it's not going to be a profit-making company.
Yep.
It's going to have a very clear set of objectives. It will have a board of trustees that kind of make sure it delivers those objectives. And that's what Our Future Health has as well.
So it couldn't be a company where all the profits went to the taxpayer?
So we do... There have been other endeavours where we've funded research and we've put in place certain arrangements to make sure that, the taxpayer is not funding other companies that will make profit from it. That's a kind of government principle. We don't subsidise the market, essentially.
Yep.
So there are subsidy control rules in place.
That makes sense.
So that will be worked through as well in this scenario where we're co-investing in something that is for the greater public benefit. Each investing partner will want to make sure there is value for their investment.
Yep.
But it will be clear that government will not be investing its funds in something that simply benefits other companies. Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So you're now having to put together a business plan for this.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out all the different models.
Yeah.
Who your trustees are going to be, who's going to co-invest.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about actually building the company? Are you going to be putting management in?
Yeah.
Oh, I love this. This is incredible.
So we have So I haven't said
really
actually.
Impressed, by the way. No, seriously, I'm really, really impressed. I think this is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Sounds like a really
Well, it's an example of the
innovative way.
opportunities you get when you work in government. Actually, you get to work in a lot of different areas. I obviously have experts advising me. I'm not just kind of making this up by myself. Just before I move into the kind of setting up the company bit, I forgot to mention that we have recruited 2 experts to chair the dementia mission.
Yeah.
So it's the mission is.
Who are they and what are they excited about?
Yeah, so one of them is the Chief Executive of Alzheimer's Research UK,
Perfect.
Hilary Evans.
Perfect.
Obviously has a wealth of experience in the sector, understands the challenges in terms of where we're at with research, what the need is for patients, how to, how we as government should be engaging with patients, who are all the different stakeholders in the sector that we need to be bringing together. Brings a lot of that expertise. And then the other chair is Professor Nadeem Sawar, who is a senior executive in the pharma industry. So again, he brings his pharma experience. We're engaging and we need to collaborate quite closely with pharma. So he brings a lot of that experience. He has himself set up some initiatives as well, kind of R&D initiatives in this space, in both the dementia and the data space. So we're bringing a lot of kind of data opportunities to this as well. So yeah, they both bring a wealth of experience to this.
They sound like good catches.
Yes,
well
very much so.
Well done.
Yeah.
I saw it online. I thought, yeah, this is good. This is really, really good. You've hooked in some great people.
Yeah.
So you're going to be working closely with them now?
Yeah. I am. Yeah, they came on board in March, so we've been working very closely with them both ever since.
Awesome.
So they're advising us on all aspects of the mission. They report into ministers, so yeah, they get.
How big is your team?
I have 3 people in my team. But there's a lot of kind of other people across government that we work with.
Yep.
So it's not just us 3.
So it's like cross-functional matrix.
Yeah.
Because at the networking event, you seemed very pally and close to lots of people who were doing completely different things.
Yeah. They're colleagues in the Office for Life Sciences, and we have a good kind of.
It seemed like there was good banter.
Yeah.
There's good energy.
Yeah. There's nice. Good energy in OLS, and we have like 2. We call them huddles every week where. Either people give updates on what they're working on, or we'll talk about kind of cross-organisational issues or learning and development and all sorts of things. So yeah, there's a lot that we do as a directorate. So yeah.
With so many different things going on, how do you keep appraised with what else is going on in the Office for Life Sciences? It's the huddles that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's the main way we do it. People will kind of celebrate their successes if they've published something or whatever, and we'll we have on Teams, we have a huddle chat, so people will just publish things that might be relevant to others or that we should be aware of, because we engage so broadly across the sector. People often ask us about work going on in other areas of OLS as well. Our director does a lovely end of week email as well, where nice. she kind of reflects on certain big meetings she's been in. She'll celebrate people's successes across the directorate, that sort of thing. So yeah.
Do you find that effective? The end of the week email, you like it?
Yeah. It's good for both learning what others are doing, but also when she mentions your team as well, it's really nice to feel kind of recognised and rewarded. Yeah.
So what's coming next for you then with this potential company? Like, is there like a timeline for maybe setting it up?
Yeah. So again, we need to sort of confirm the model that we're actually going to do this through. We'll need to secure kind of
some money,
the partnerships. Mm-hmm. Well, so on the government side, we have funding allocated to it. We still need to go through final kind of clearance processes, but we're also trying to secure match investment from industry. So we're still going through, working with interested we're calling them founding partners, to understand, what that partnership needs to look like. There'll be a lot of challenges around IP, for instance, because we don't just want them to bring funding. We want people to bring the assets that they're working on, so that we can help, accelerate these biomarkers to the right place. So there'll be a lot of IP challenges to work through.
Would the company sort of take on the assets and own the assets and develop the assets, do you think, or is it more like you identify an asset as part of the program and you help open doors through the company in terms of, networks or changes to policy and so on?
So it's a good question. I don't think we've worked through all of it at the moment. government will be working on the principle of, our interest is whatever is in the interest of the public. The companies will be coming at it with the view of, we've developed, X asset to a certain point. We will want to seek the value from that. And also they'll be very careful not to kind of share IP with potential competitors. So there will be a lot that we still need to work through. So I don't think we don't have a position on it yet.
I think finding the balance between competitive and non-competitive is possibly the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Getting funding and buy-in is big, but
and I've established
companies are so IP sensitive because for pharma
because that's their main asset, isn't it?
So important.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah, and we understand that from a government perspective. But some of the assets that we have, probably not right to use the word asset, but in the health space is our people and patients and their their data. We need to make sure that that it's protected and preserved first and foremost. It's not exploited by people who shouldn't have access to it. But
absolutely.
But also, if we're helping, the ultimate aim of this is to help accelerate the development of new treatments for dementia, and the ultimate benefit of that is for the public. If we can use data from health records as an example, but this is maybe a sensitive subject and I'm not the expert on it. We need to make sure that we're not kind of giving away the value of that for free. We need to protect it to make sure it's safe.
I think there's a lot of people interested in that
data
set.
And so that's one of the elements of the mission as well that we're thinking about. We're looking at setting up a people's forum to make sure that we bring people along with us at every stage of the journey when we're scoping out what we're going to do, how we're going to set it up, how we're going to design it.
Patient people first.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also why it's brilliant to have Hilary on board, because she gets that more than anyone.
As the CEO of
Alzheimer's Research UK. Yeah.
Maybe a good podcast guest at some point in time in the future.
Yeah. She's regularly doing media appearances. So
I'm sure if she's the CEO of such a big organisation.
Yeah. Especially with the recent kind of announcements in the media.
So what do you think is going to come next then for the field, and what are you most excited about?
So I think there's the immediate question around these current drugs, but I think there'll be further waves of treatments coming through, some of which might target amyloid and tau, some of which might target other disease mechanisms.
Yep.
So I think that's quite exciting, and the work we're doing around biomarkers will help to accelerate some of that as well.
There's a company in Aberdeen that's targeting tau. TauRx.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
Yep, and they're using methylene blue.
Yes.
Which is very interesting. And I think one of their biggest challenges was that we talked about placebo control earlier.
Yeah.
I heard one of their biggest challenges related to the fact that when you take methylene blue, your pee goes blue.
I heard that too. And
it's actually difficult to find something that does that other than methylene blue.
Yeah.
So how could, if that's the drug, how can you have a placebo?
Yeah.
But they're kind of interesting because Aberdeen, as you might know, is not like a biotech centre of excellence.
Yeah.
There are people trying to make it a biotech centre of excellence, and hats off to them and kudos to them, and keep going because I think it's possible. But Tau have raised a lot of money and have done phase 3 trials.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible. Anyways, back away from methylene blue to your vision for the future. So you think there's going to be more drugs?
Yeah, more treatments coming through.
Biomarkers?
Yeah, more biomarkers. So just on biomarkers, the current way of diagnosing and monitoring progress of patients is to do some really quite sort of basic tests, which have existed for a long time. I don't know if you kind of came across these in your medical training, but there's like a sort of basic...
Draw a clock.
Yeah, draw a clock.
Yeah.
Pen and paper clock test.
Yeah.
I actually don't know exactly how it's administered, but
How good does your clock look then, Megan, when you do it?
I haven't done one actually.
I've done one.
Have you?
Awful.
So what do you have to do?
So
you draw
bad.
the clock. Do you have to remember anything about the clock?
I think you have to. I think you draw the clock at a certain time or something like that.
Oh right, okay.
And I mean, for someone like me who's so bad at drawing, anyways.
Yeah.
I think
I'm sure mine would be bad as well.
Fail the test. Yeah. And I had to draw a zebra recently as part of a drawing exercise I was doing with a 4-year-old, and it looked. I mean, I can show you the picture on my phone. It looked...
Yeah, I can't draw. I can't draw to save my life.
It looked like a sort of deformed dinosaur, not a zebra. And hers looked absolutely phenomenal. It's quite embarrassing, actually.
Yeah. I've always just told myself some people
So
can do it
bad.
and some people can't, and I'm just in the second.
So bad, honestly.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's tests which are kind of...
So that's the test that most clinicians use now to diagnose dementia.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of technologies being developed at the moment, which we'll be exploring through our biomarker program, both blood-based, where you can actually pick up certain molecular signatures associated with different diseases, CSF, so that's a cerebrospinal fluid. So they currently do use CSF testing in some to help test if patients are eligible for these current drugs. But blood-based would be ideal because it's much easier to take.
CSF.
Yeah. To get CSF, you've got to do a lumbar puncture, which is quite invasive. You don't want to do that unless you're already quite sure someone might have the disease.
So for the listener, to do a lumbar puncture, you have to ask someone to kind of go into the fetal position, and a big needle is stuck in between the two vertebrae, L4 and L5, or L3 and L4. I can't remember exactly. My medical colleagues will laugh at me. And you kind of stick the needle in to puncture the matter which kind of encases and protects the central nervous system, and then you are able to extract the fluid which kind of bathes the brain and all the central nervous system in your spine. So it's quite invasive, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's specialist anaesthetists and doctors who do that to make sure that they get it right. So it's pretty heavy duty.
Yeah. And you know, there are specialist doctors who can do this very well and very safely.
Absolutely, yeah.
There just aren't enough of them for us to be able to scale that up. And also, you wouldn't want to do that for a patient unless you really needed to diagnose them.
Absolutely.
You know, I think the future involves mass population kind of screening.
Blood-based or serum-based.
Yeah.
You know,
if we're
saliva-based.
potentially.
Why not? Yeah.
Potentially.
Why
yeah.
not?
But I think a blood-based biomarker would be the best enabler of that.
Imagine if what actually happened in the amyloid story was it was the microbiome producing too much amyloid. Yeah, that's probably not the case, but I just thought I'd plug in the microbiome and gut health into the mix there. And I
quickly Googled microbiome and dementia as well. And I found a link between the microbiome and dementia via inflammation, which doesn't surprise me.
Does not surprise me at all in the slightest.
And as I was saying before, there's a lot of research emerging about inflammation being involved earlier in the disease pathway for many of these diseases. So the future holds new biomarkers that give us different ways of diagnosing, better measures during clinical trials. So one of our objectives is to speed up and reduce the cost of clinical trials. So if you were doing this sort of quite subjective cognitive test, it's hard to know how much someone has changed from one day to the next. If you've got a blood-based biomarker, you can measure it much more quantitatively.
Absolutely.
And then there's also the field is saying that the disease actually starts in patients sometimes up to 15, 20 years before they exhibit any symptoms.
Wow. Same in Parkinson's.
Yeah. And so again, these symptoms that we're currently talking about are cognitive symptoms, so memory, function, that sort of thing. But what if we can detect it in the blood 15 years earlier and give people treatments 15 years earlier? They're much more likely to be effective, you know, prevent their progression into symptomatic disease, and, you know, maybe one day eventually halt it altogether. Who knows? There might even be a vaccine. People are working on Alzheimer's vaccines at the moment.
Wow. And are they early stage, like really early stage, or are they...
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what stage, but I think they've done at least phase 1 studies.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that is very exciting. Good. And if we were to come back in a few years, what do you think are the kind of nearer term milestones that you want to deliver on for the mission?
A suite of biomarkers that ideally have been scientifically validated and are clinically actionable. We're working with MHRA as well to understand if they were to consider additional biomarkers, what data would they need to ensure robustness. So it could be that the gold standard is using these cognitive tests. Can we replace that with a blood-based biomarker instead? and will that be acceptable by the regulator?
Wow.
So that's one of our kind of 2 to 5 year goals. And then the other is around speeding up clinical trials and getting far more people involved in clinical trials as well. At the moment, pharma companies have to, recruit people based on very specific criteria, but there's a lot more we can learn from that, people.
Trust me.
Yeah.
Recent experience.
Yeah.
We're running a phase 2 study at the moment.
Right.
In cirrhosis and HE, and you do need to be very, very careful about who you bring and don't bring into your study.
Yeah.
Because if you bring the wrong people in for whatever reason, then your drug might never make it.
Yeah.
And that's not a result of your drug not being good. It's to do with the study not being designed properly to showcase your drug.
Yeah.
Part of that is biomarkers, for sure.
Yeah. But
also the criteria.
Yeah. So and that's particularly challenging in the dementia space at the moment. So yeah, the other ambition is how do we get more people involved in these studies? But even if they're not eligible for a particular study, how do we keep them engaged, and how do we continue to learn about these diseases?
Because it's such a long-term study, presumably.
Yeah.
I mean, 18 months actually is not that long, but based on what you've said, you maybe need to try and intervene 20 years earlier.
Yeah.
Imagine, that's a long study.
Imagine designing those
big
studies.
Study, big study. And that's also, I think, where the government can be involved, because something like that, I think, is maybe better suited to a more kind of
national level program. Yeah.
I think so.
Exactly.
I think so.
Exactly. Yeah, and there are various cohorts that already exist in this space, so we're looking at collaborating with those institutions to understand, can we access those cohorts? I know we're talking about people here, but I know. The technical sort of language. How can we build off of that rather than just recruiting a population of people from scratch? I don't think that's necessary in all cases.
Agreed. Megan, we've been speaking for, I think, just under 2 hours. I've not looked at my notes once, which is a really good sign, actually, of a great conversation. Probably need to wrap it up. So I wanted to take the opportunity as a host to thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being so passionate and enthusiastic about everything that you're doing. And hopefully stay in touch. And I wish you all the very best for everything you're doing right now with the mission, because it sounds super important. And there's millions of people out there who need you to continue doing what you're doing. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.